The trial in the case that set off a year of escalating tensions between Canada and China is now underway. Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou was arrested in Vancouver back in December of 2018 on an extradition request from the U.S. Since then, China has detained two Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, and trade relations have deteriorated considerably. Meng's extradition case begins in Vancouver this morning. Let's bring in the CBC's Megan Batchelor, who's following the case for us. She's outside the courthouse in Vancouver. Hi, Megan. Thanks very much for being with us. What happened today in court?
Hi. Well, Vashi, today the defense got its case laid out this morning. They spent the day really outlining and stressing the issue of double criminality. And it's a bit of a complex issue, so let me try to explain it to you. It's the heart of the Extradition Act in Canada, and it basically means that if someone is arrested in Canada for the purpose of another country to be extradited, the charge that that person is facing has to be a crime in both Canada as well as the country that they are being extradited to. And so the defense in this case is arguing that, well, okay, fraud is a criminal act in Canada as well as the United States, where they are trying to extradite Meng Wanzhou to. It is not in the case here where she's alleged to have broken sanctions with Iran that the United States has. Canada, though, does not have those sanctions, and that is the heart of the defense's case that's being laid out today. And I'll read a quote from a defense lawyer that was said today in court. This is from a reporter that was in the courtroom. It says, "This extradition has every appearance of the United States seeking to enlist Canada to enforce the very sanctions that we have repudiated. We do not have sanctions that cover this conduct. We say the essence of the conduct is sanctions violation." So that's the whole issue here, and that's what the defense is going to need to talk about. It's a very nuanced kind of issue and a very nuanced sort of defense that they are going to need to make here. And so that did get started today. This is the first official start of the extradition part of the hearing for Meng Wanzhou. This is expected to last for the rest of the week. The defense is expected to take around 2 days to do this, to delay out their case, Vashi.
And what's next in the case?
So once this week is over, the judge will then take the time to decide whether or not that issue of double criminality has been met. And in fact, if the judge does find that in fact it has not, and the extradition has been canceled, the case is completely over at that point. However, if it does continue, there's expected to be many more hearings as we go on from here, not only to get the extradition underway, but then to get the criminal case heard in the United States. So we are still a very long ways away from this being resolved, at least if it does go beyond this week, Vashi.
All right, thanks, Megan. The CBC's Megan Batchelor for us with that update in Vancouver. As we mentioned, this case has set off a really intense diplomatic dispute between Canada and China. Here's a recap of where things stand. Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor have now been detained in China for more than 400 days without access to legal counsel or contact with their families. They've received only monthly visits from Canadian consular officials. This past December, China signaled the two could stand trial on national security charges. Another casualty in Canada's tensions with China is this country's agricultural exports. China banned canola shipments from Canada, alleging they found pests in the Canadian product. The ban could cost Canada $2.5 billion a year. China's move is now being challenged at the World Trade Organization. Canadian pork and beef exports to China were also blocked last year, but the ban was lifted in November. The trial in the case that set off a year of escalating tensions between Canada and China is now underway. The extradition trial of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou started this morning in Vancouver. So what can we expect to happen in this legal process? There are 3 phases in this extradition trial. In the first, the judge will hear arguments on so-called double criminality, on whether Meng's alleged conduct would be considered a crime here had it occurred in this country. If the judge rules that it doesn't, extradition proceedings end there. The second phase, though, begins in June. That's when the defense will make its case that Meng's rights were violated during her arrest in Vancouver over a year ago. If the judge agrees there was an abusive process, that would also end the proceedings. The third and final stage is scheduled for the fall. That's when the judge will consider whether there's enough evidence to actually extradite Meng. If the judge decides to commit Meng for extradition, the decision to transfer her to the U.S. falls to Justice Minister David Lametti. Today also marked the first meeting of MPs on the newly established House Special Committee on Canada-China Relations. This committee was formed after a Conservative motion passed with the support of other opposition parties. MPs will examine all aspects of the Canada-China relationship, including Meng's case and its fallout. And the first person they want to hear from is Canada's man in Beijing, Ambassador Dominic Barton. Why does his name top their list? Rob Oliphant is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Next to him, Dan Albus is a Conservative member of the committee. And next to him, Rachel Blaney is the NDP's whip. Hi to all three of you. Thanks very much for being here.
Great to be here.
We do normally start with the government, but in this case, I'm going to start with the opposition only because the Conservatives are the one that put forth the motion to hear, for the committee to hear from Canada's Ambassador to China, Dominic Barton. What is it that you'd like to garner from Mr. Barton?
Well, we're at a critical juncture right now between the relationship between Canada and China. The government hasn't had a lot of success. In fact, whether it be trade challenges dealing with canola, whether you see they struggle to respond to Hong Kong, or even just coming to a decision on something like Huawei and whether or not it should be in our 5G. The government seems to always be behind a step or three in this relationship. And so we figure that the fastest way for the committee members to be able to start a study is to hear directly from the person who is responsible for that relationship in China, and that's Ambassador Barton.
Mr. Oliphant, let me give you a chance to respond to that. The accusation from the opposition is essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, but that the government is dragging its feet on this file. Your response to that?
Not at all. I think today was a good sign of a committee that it was a struggle to get there, but we worked collaboratively. We eventually got to moving a way ahead that I think was a win-win-win-win situation. We're very pleased that Ambassador Barton will be joining the committee. We wanted to take some time to make sure the committee was appropriately briefed, that we could lay out the groundwork of a very complex relationship. The relationship that we have with China, like China has with many other countries, is complex, it's difficult, it's challenging. It's also very important. We have important people-to-people relationships. We have important business relationships. And we like to raise important issues around human rights, the rule of law, and do that. In the midst of all that, we have 2 Canadians arbitrarily detained. They've been over 400 days now in detention. And we have provided every consular service that we've been able to provide, given a very difficult situation. This is not, we are not running that show, China is, and we are trying to find every way possible to ensure that those Canadians are safe. Ms.
Blaney, we've had a number of former ambassadors to China on the show, and most of them have theorized that those 2 men, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who have been detained since December of 2018, will not be released until this extradition hearing with Meng Wanzhou wraps up. Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, what are the implications for the government?
Well, I think, this comes back to what we talked about in committee today, is how urgent this issue is. And it's urgent for many reasons. But this, of course, is one of the fundamental ones. We have Canadians that are not safe. They're in China, and we want to see them come back. So, I think the rule of law has to roll out now we are where we're at. And I think we have to, as politicians, make sure to be respectful of the process of law. But again, this is why it's so important to have the ambassador come as quickly as possible, because if we're going to treat this as seriously as we need to, that's the reason that this committee was created, was to really look at the fundamental challenges that are happening between these 2 countries and what's happening to so many Canadians across our country when we look at the trade agreement, when we look at our farmers, but also when we look at the 2 individuals that are stuck in China, and we need to do everything we can to see that change.
Do you agree, Mr. Albus, though, with the assessment that unless something concludes where the extradition hearing is concerned, those 2 Canadians will remain detained?
So again, the Chinese have made their position clear. The government has not made our own position clear when it comes to these things. Well, they've said it's subject to a process, but they haven't been clear as to whether or not Huawei is in our national interest or not. Let's be mindful that there are companies right now that are ready to spend billions of dollars investing in 5G to help innovate our economy. That decision can't come forward because of it. You have canola farmers that have asked the government, to open and to work with them on these things, and yet they don't seem to be able to get anywhere. So my point is
with respect, though, when it comes to Huawei, if the as the Conservatives want, the government were to come out right now and say we are banning Huawei from entering this country with its 5G network, what ramifications do you think that would have for the two Canadians?
Well, and that's the point, though, is that the government's not saying anything, and that's.
But you want them to come out and say
well,
no to
no,
Huawei.
I want us to actually look at it, and that's the point of the committee, is to say how do these different issues relate, and to put them into a context. The minister himself, Minister Champagne, has said that the government doesn't have a framework to deal with China. That's where this parliamentary committee has stepped up, so we can help the government to get onto a better path. And that's why we've called for the ambassador. We need to start from there. We need to bring all these issues in. We need to examine them. We also need to hear outside people, outside of government, to give us their viewpoints on how we can best proceed. Because right now, the government is not giving a lot of information.
Does Mr. Albus have a point, Mr. Oliphant, that in fact, instead of making those decisions, like, for example, on Huawei, the government has taken a step back? I'd bring up the other example of the Prime Minister saying earlier in December that he was asking the United States not to sign a trade deal in exchange for, unless the two Canadians were released. We saw Phase 1 agreed to last week.
And we don't know the ramifications of that at all yet, and we're getting differing stories about what was actually signed and what was actually happening. I don't think Mr. Albus actually has a point at all. The government has been completely clear that we stand for the rule of law. We stand working multilaterally with other countries who have been through these situations with China before. We stand with Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig and their families. We have done consular services, and it's actually quite easy. I've been in opposition. I've been an opposition member, and I know what that's like. In government, we take these issues extremely seriously and do them one step at a time. This is a complex web of issues. We're very happy to have a committee. The committee will do its work. The committee may add some insights that the government wants to hear.
But it did take the government, with respect, a long time to appoint Mr. Barton even, right? The office was vacated for months. Is there a point in that?
And we had an excellent charge d'affaires, the number two in the...
But the fact remains those two men remain detained.
Absolutely. And some people have been detained for much longer. The reality is we do not control that agenda. What we control is our ability to keep exercising multilateral, having a multilateral impact on China to make this decision in the best interest of Canada. We have an unprecedented number of partners from around the world that are supporting us. Also, watching carefully.
But nothing happened with that trade deal.
Absolutely.
So far.
That's not for me to talk about. The reality is we have to take one step at a time and do it cautiously. Are we anxious? Yes. Do we want to see a resolution to this? Absolutely. All Canadians do. What we are saying to the opposition is, come to this committee, get briefed. They didn't want to be briefed. We want them to be briefed. We want them to take the time to understand the complexity of these issues. And we're absolutely willing to do that and have Ambassador Barton come at the first opportunity he can come in.
Ms. Blaney?
Well, I just want to say that is not true, that the opposition does not want to be briefed. Of course we want to be briefed. The point is, it's urgent to have the ambassador before us. What was discussed
Why is it urgent? What is urgent?
Because we set the tone for the committee.
It's
Understanding the
400 days.
person who's in that pivotal role, the point person, just makes a lot of sense. And the other reality is we're talking about urgent situations. So if we're going to treat it like that it is urgent, then why not have the briefing happen more quickly? I mean, I mentioned that in the committee. I said, why not? You know, if this is so important that all the opposition be briefed and have the access to the information that the government side has, if we're going to treat it urgently, then let's make that happen. You know, bureaucrats can educate us and we can get it done so that next week we're sitting down in front of an ambassador. So to me, it's just about how urgent is this? Canadians want to see us. I understand this is complex. I don't think anybody at this table would say, oh, this is very easy and just get it done. It is a complex situation, but it is also one that needs to be done. But saying that we do not want to be briefed, I just want to clarify that is not the case at all.
The NDP and the Conservatives waited to the last minute, possibly under the motion from the House of Commons, to appoint their members. The last minute possible. So we have done everything we can to expedite this process.
Well, you also opposed, the Liberals opposed the creation of the
committee. We voted against it
yeah.
because we thought that the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Standing Committee on International Trade, the Subcommittee on International Human Rights are the right place to do this. The House has spoken. The House, we will follow what the House has done. We will work to be collaborative. We'll work to be absolutely engaged. We will make sure this committee gets its work done, and we'll do it well. And we hope that the opposition will be respectful of that process as well.
I'm running out of time. One last comment from you, Mr.
So
Elvis.
I would say is that the government did not want this committee formed in the first place. But if you look at it, it's because we're going to be looking at the fact they originally proposed a free trade agreement with China that didn't go anywhere. They proposed and floated an idea of an extradition agreement with China. They've proposed all these things, and they've been horrible failures. If you see, when talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, he left some of our allies, like the Japanese and the Australian, where he didn't show up for a trade meeting.
Did you wait until the last second to sign up your members on this
and
committee?
So, in 8 months to get an ambassador. So the fact is, the government doesn't like the idea of scrutiny. They like to keep the information
But they agreed to
to
Dominic Barton
themselves.
appearing before the committee.
After considerable pressure from the opposition parties. It was a long meeting, Rob. But all I can simply say is I hope this committee can be productive, and I hope the government and government members will understand that Parliament is asserting itself, and they need to cooperate in order to give us a better understanding of what our national interest is in this relationship.
Okay, I'm out of time, but thank you very much to all three of you for your time this evening. I appreciate it
many
very
months.
much. We sure will. Rob Oliphant, Dan Albus, and Rachel Blaney.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.